Bildad Kaggia, the unsung hero of Kenya's independence. Welcome to Wandia Chronicles, where we explore the untold stories of African history. In today's episode, we're diving into the life of Bildad Kaggia, one of Kenya's most principled and fascinating freedom fighters. And trust me, by the end you'll wonder why there isn't already a blockbuster movie about this man. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to Wandia Chronicles and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into history. If you're new here, Caribou, you're in the right place for engaging and informative content. And if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. Now let's get into it. Early life and revolutionary spirit. Picture Kenya in the 1930s. A young boy in primary school is asked what he wants to be when he grows up. Little Bildad Kaggia confidently tells his teacher he wants to be a warrior. The puzzled teacher replies that the days of warriors hunting lions are over. But Kaggia shoots back. Kenya still needs warriors to send the white colonizers back to Britain. Talk about an early spark of rebellion. Even as a kid, Kaggia had a cheeky and determined streak. The kind that makes you smile and think, this boy is going places. Kaggia was born in 1921 to a poor peasant family in Dagoretti near Nairobi. He was bright and did well in school, even earning admission to the prestigious Alliance High School. But his family couldn't afford the fees. Instead, teenage Kaggia took a clerical job at a district commissioner's office, where he experienced the daily humiliations of colonial-era racism. This taste of injustice only fueled his resolve. When World War II came knocking, Kaggia found himself working at a military recruitment office. He actually hated war, but he saw an opportunity. Joining the British Army might let him travel and see the world. So off he went, serving with the King's African Rifles in Asia, and even getting posted to Britain during the war. And guess what he discovered in London? Europeans were just ordinary people, no different from Africans, which made young Bildad wonder, why on earth are these folks ruling us back home? That realization was life-changing. Kaggia returned to Kenya in 1946 as a decorated veteran, but the state of his homeland appalled him. Life for ordinary Kenyans was worse than what he'd seen in military barracks abroad. The colonial government was still grabbing African lands and oppressing the people. It was clear to Kaggia that Kenya needed those warriors he'd dreamed about, not with spears and shields, but with ideas, courage, and organization. He was ready to fight for liberation. By the way, if you're enjoying this story so far, give this video a thumbs up. And remember to subscribe to Wandia Chronicles for more captivating stories like this. We have plenty of untold tales of heroes and heroines to share. As you subscribe, drop a comment letting us know you did welcome to the family. Faith, rebellion, and dini ya Kaggia. Back in Kenya after the war, Bildad Kaggia didn't just jump into politics, he first caused a stir in church. Yes, you heard that right. Our revolutionary was also a man of faith, but with a twist. Kaggia looked at the missionary-controlled churches and saw them as a tool of colonialism. So what did he do? He stood up in church and denounced the church in the church for being an instrument of foreign domination. Talk about guts. Kaggia's vision was to create a purely African Christian movement, free from European control, incorporating African traditions and values. Soon, he had a large following in central Kenya, attending his independent prayer meetings. People started calling his movement Andu Akaggia, Kaggia's people, which later became known as Dini ya Kaggia, literally Kaggia's religion. Ironically, Kaggia never wanted his name on it. He wasn't doing it for ego, but the nickname stuck anyway. His fiery sermons and gatherings alarmed the colonial authorities and church leaders, who saw this as a threat. The colonial government arrested and harassed Kaggia and his followers multiple times for holding illegal meetings. But the movement kept spreading, even beyond his Kikuyu community, into other regions like Nyanza. Through this Christian socialist approach, Kaggia was liberating people's minds. No longer were they the meek, yes sir congregation, they were waking up to question the Mzungu, white man's authority. Kaggia realized that spiritual liberation was only the first step. Once people stopped fearing the colonial powers as infallible, they could fight for political liberation too. By 1947, he decided to leave the preaching to others and jump with both feet into the political struggle. I like to imagine him saying, "All right, I've given you a sermon. Now, let's plan a revolution." Oh, and here's a fun nugget. In 1947, Kaggia married his sweetheart Wambui in a totally unconventional wedding that shocked the neighbors. How unconventional? Well, they deliberately did not invite any missionary pastor to officiate. They basically did a do-it-yourself Christian wedding with no fancy clergy and absolutely no European food served at the reception. It was a proudly African ceremony reflecting exactly who Kaggia was. A man who walked the talk of independence in every aspect of life. You can almost hear the whispers in the village. "Hiya, did you hear? Kaggia didn't even serve tea and crumpets at his wedding." By the late 1940s, Bildad Kaggia was looking for ways to fight the colonial system head-on. He initially joined the mainstream political party, the Kenya African Union, KAU, especially after Jomo Kenyatta became KAU's leader in 1947. But to his dismay, KAU at the national level was pretty tame and slow at that time. Kaggia was young, radical, and impatient for change. The man wanted action, not endless polite petitions. So he turned to where the real energy was bubbling, the trade union movement. In those days, Nairobi's trade unions were hotbeds of anti-colonial fervor. Kaggia admired fiery union leaders like Fred Kubai and Makan Singh, who weren't afraid to challenge the colonial authorities. In 1948, Kaggia founded the Clerks and Commercial Workers Union and became its chairman. He quickly rose through the ranks. By 1950, he was elected president of the Labour Trade Union of East Africa, essentially leading one of the region's largest union federations. Under his leadership, the unions gained huge support among urban workers in Nairobi, so much so that they took over the Nairobi branch of KAU. Kaggia himself became the KAU Nairobi secretary in 1951. Now, our man Kaggia was a savvy organizer. He knew the pen can sometimes be as mighty as the sword. To spread the message of freedom, he helped start newspapers in local languages, like Inoro Ria Gikuyu, the whetstone of Ajikuyu, in Gikuyu, and Africa Mpya, New Africa, in Kiswahili. These papers boldly reported on KAU rallies and stoked the fires of independence in people's hearts. I love that one paper was called Whetstone. It was literally meant to sharpen people's resolve. And fun fact, a couple decades later, Kaggia would be literally working at a grindstone, but we'll get to that irony soon. Kaggia also helped form the KAU Study Circle, basically a brains trust within the party that drafted memos and resolutions, pushing KAU to be more militant. He was at the forefront of campaigns like the Anti-Federation League, which successfully stopped Kenya from being forced into a colonial federation with other British territories. He even joined the Nairobi City Council's African Advisory Council and fought against apartheid-like segregation laws in the city. One of his proudest achievements was helping overturn racist city bylaws that restricted where Africans, Asians, and Europeans could live in Nairobi. By 1952, frustration was boiling over. Peaceful protests and petitions weren't budging the British 1 inch. Kaggia and other militant activists had lost faith in constitutional methods. They began organizing in secret. Kaggia and his fellow radicals, people like Fred Kubai, for example, were initiated into the underground Mau Mau movement. Unlike the legendary forest fighters in the Aberdares and Mount Kenya regions, who fought with rifles and pangas, Kaggia's battlefield was urban and political, but no less important. He sat on the Mau Mau Central Committee, the brains of the resistance, tasked with coordinating the struggle and recruiting supporters. In other words, while Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi and his fighters were battling in the forests, Bildad Kaggia was mobilizing the masses in towns and villages, crafting strategy, and keeping the flame of resistance alive. Let's set the scene. October 1952. The British have had enough of this growing rebellion. They declare a state of emergency, sending soldiers and police to round up nationalist leaders in a massive crackdown, dramatically codenamed Operation Jock Scott. On the night of October 20th, 1952, Kaggia and 5 other key leaders, Jomo Kenyatta, Achieng Oneko, Fred Kubai, Paul Ngei, and Kungu Karumba were all arrested. This famous group would be known as the Kapenguria Six, named after the remote prison where they were put on trial. Kaggia had actually gone underground in 1950, leaving his young family to help organize the Mau Mau insurgency. He knew the risk and had evaded capture for a while, but the 1952 swoop got him. The colonial court accused them of being the masterminds of Mau Mau, essentially charging them with daring to demand their country back. After a farcical trial, widely considered a sham, Kaggia and his comrades were convicted and imprisoned in 1953. Kaggia would languish in British prisons and detention camps for nearly 9 years, from 1953 until late 1961. Those were tough years. Kenya was at war with itself, as Mau Mau fighters and British forces clashed in the highlands, and thousands of civilians were herded into detention camps. Kaggia missed seeing the peak of the war firsthand due to being behind bars, but his sacrifice was part of the price of freedom. Inside the prison, the Kapenguria Six remained defiant. They became symbols of the struggle, proof that the British feared not just the fighters in the forest, but the ideas and inspiration that leaders like Kaggia provided. In fact, Kenyatta was often portrayed by the British as the face of the Mau Mau, even though, ironically, Kenyatta himself hadn't taken the Mau Mau oath and was more of a moderate figurehead. Meanwhile, Kaggia was one of the real strategists who had helped keep the resistance going. Fast forward to August 1961. Under immense pressure, the colonial government finally released Kaggia and the other detainees. Can you imagine? Kaggia walked free after nearly a decade, returning to a very different Kenya. The Mau Mau War had ended in 1956, and the independence negotiations were already underway. His comrade Jomo Kenyatta, also just freed, was gaining popularity as the likely future leader of Kenya. For Kaggia, it was time to pick up where he left off and continue the fight for uhuru, freedom, on the political front. If you're finding this story engaging, smash that like button and subscribe to Wandia Chronicles. We bring you the hidden stories of heroes like Kaggia, and your support helps us keep going. Also, leave us a comment if you knew about Bildad Kaggia before. What did you find most surprising about his story so far? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Kenya finally achieved independence on December 12, 1963. A triumphant moment. In the celebratory elections of 1963, Bildad Kaggia was elected Member of Parliament for Kandara constituency in central Kenya. He joined the independence government led by Prime Minister, later President, Jomo Kenyatta. Kaggia was appointed as an assistant minister in the Kenyatta cabinet, a junior ministerial position, specifically in the Ministry of Education. It seemed the old freedom fighter friends were reunited in leadership, ready to build the new Kenya. But oh boy, things did not stay rosy. You see, Kaggia entered government with the same firebrand spirit and integrity that had guided him through the struggle. He was not interested in power for power's sake, or wealth. His priority was lifting up the poor, the landless, and fulfilling the promises made to the people who bled for independence. Very soon, he became disillusioned by what he saw among some of his comrades in power. Corruption, greed, and nepotism were rearing their ugly heads immediately. While ordinary Kenyans still waited for land, jobs, and basic needs, some new leaders were out to eat, to use a Kenyan expression, grabbing land, awarding themselves business deals, living large. Kaggia was not having it. Kaggia spoke out boldly against corruption and betrayal of the independence ideals. In cabinet meetings and public forums, he would question policies that seemed to favor the rich or former colonials at the expense of the common citizens. For example, when Kenyatta's government adopted the willing buyer, willing seller approach to land, which basically meant if landless Kenyans wanted farms, they'd have to buy land back from British settlers at market price. Kaggia was furious. He argued, how can poor Africans be expected to buy back their own stolen land? It was, in his view, a complete betrayal of the Mau Mau fighters who had died fighting for that very land. Kenyatta and the ruling elite did not appreciate Kaggia's constant moral reminders. He was the conscience in the room, which made the corrupt uncomfortable. Before long, the clash came to a head. In 1964, barely a year into independence, Kaggia was summarily dropped from the government. There's a famous incident where Kenyatta wrote Kaggia a letter telling him to shut up about land issues. Kaggia pointedly responded in Parliament, with Kenyatta present, that he was elected by the people of Kandara, not appointed by Kenyatta, and he owed his loyalty to the people. You can imagine the deathly silence in the room, and Kenyatta's face. Soon after, Kaggia was sacked from his ministerial post. That marked the beginning of an irreconcilable fallout between the two former freedom comrades. By 1965, Kaggia, along with others like Oginga Odinga, the vice president at the time who was also increasingly critical of the government's direction, were being marginalized and labeled as radicals or even communists for their pro-poor stance. Kaggia was indeed a left-leaning nationalist. He believed in socialism and equal opportunities for all, but his enemies used communist as a smear. In 1966, things came to a head. Odinga resigned or was pushed out of government and formed an opposition party, the Kenya People's Union, KPU. Bildad Kaggia, true to form, didn't hesitate to join the opposition KPU and was even elected the party's vice president. They were going to continue the struggle, this time against corruption and one-party domination. President Kenyatta took Kaggia's defection very personally. After all, they had been in the trenches together, or rather, in Kapenguria jail together. Kenyatta felt betrayed that Kaggia would dare join the opposition. According to Kaggia, Kenyatta even tried to bribe him back into the fold with an offer of a huge piece of land, something Kaggia, a man of principle, flatly refused. Isn't that ironic? Kaggia fought for land for the people, and he's offered a personal slice to buy his silence. It's like the villain in a movie going, "Join me and you'll be rich," and our hero saying, "No deal." The 1966 elections that followed the KPU split were heated. Kenyatta, by then the president and the big man of Kenyan politics, traveled all the way to Kaggia's rural constituency in Kandara to personally campaign against him. Imagine, the president of the country in his robes and fly whisk, on the back of a truck in Little Kandara, basically telling people, "Don't vote for Kaggia." The pressure was immense. Kaggia lost his parliamentary seat in that election. Kenyatta had successfully silenced a thorn in his side, at least in Parliament. But Kenyatta didn't stop at that. For years after, Mzee Kenyatta taunted Kaggia publicly, saying things like, "This Kaggia fought for independence but has nothing to show for it." And sadly, it was true in material terms. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Bildad Kaggia did not amass wealth, grab land, or build mansions. He still lived modestly, almost poorly, among the people. Kenyatta would mock him as a man who failed to take advantage, basically calling him foolish for not enriching himself. Talk about twisted values. Imagine being mocked for your honesty. That's the ultimate irony. It's like a bank robber teasing an honest cop for not stealing some cash on the side. In 1969, as tensions between government and opposition rose, Kaggia was even jailed for 6 months after attending what the government termed an illegal political rally. This was around the time KPU was banned, and Kenya became effectively a one-party state under KANU. Realizing that the political space had completely closed for dissenters, Kaggia retired from active politics in the early 1970s. Sources vary. Some say 1970, others 1974, but either way, by the mid-70s he was out. After exiting the political stage, you might expect a hero like Kaggia to fade into quiet retirement. But his version of retirement was not sipping tea on a large farm. He had none. Instead, Bildad Kaggia went back to the people. He moved to the town of Kenol in Muranga, close to his rural home, and opened a little posho mill, a grinding mill for maize to earn his daily bread. Yes, one of the great architects of Kenya's freedom spent over 20 years milling maize for locals to make ends meet. He chose honest work over selling out. He repeatedly refused government reward jobs or cash handouts that were often offered to co-opt former freedom fighters. To him, accepting such favors from the corrupt regime would be a betrayal of everything he stood for. It was better to keep his integrity and live simply. Imagine strolling into a posho mill in the 1980s, and the old man operating the grinder is Bildad flippin' Kaggia. I mean, this was the guy who co-founded a nation, now measuring your maize. It's almost surreal and yet profoundly inspiring. In a world where many politicians grow fat, figuratively and literally, after leaving office, Kaggia kept his hands clean. He remained a man of the people to the very end. Neighbors said he was often seen walking around the Nairobi slums in his later years, a familiar figure with a full grey beard, always ready to chat and listen to ordinary folks. Kaggia also continued championing social justice causes outside Parliament. He spoke up for the recognition of Kenyan Asians, people of South Asian descent, who had contributed to the freedom struggle but were often forgotten or even mistreated after independence. He never lost his inclusive vision of Kenya, that it belonged to all who fought for it, regardless of race or tribe. In time, Kenya began to remember and honor Kaggia again. In 2003, after the end of the long Moi era, the new government even built a mausoleum for Kaggia and one of his fellow Kapenguria Six, Paul and Gay, honoring their contributions to the nation. And on a rainy day in March 2005, hundreds of mourners, including President Mwai Kibaki, gathered to pay respects as Bildad Mwaganu Kaggia was laid to rest in his home village of Gitura Maragua. Kaggia had died on March 7, 2005, at the age of 82. Tributes poured in for the last of the Kapenguria Six, a man often called the conscience of the independence struggle. Bildad Kaggia's life is the stuff of legend. Yet many outside Kenya, and even within, don't know his story in depth. He was a freedom fighter who fought on multiple fronts, with the Bible and the pen, with rallies and newspapers, with oaths and political office. He showed that not all battles are fought in the forest. Some are fought in union halls, in prison cells, in parliament chambers, and even at posho mills. He gave political grounding to Kenya's freedom movement by mobilizing the people, articulating the ideals of justice and equality, and standing up to both colonial and post-colonial oppression. Kaggia's story teaches us about integrity. He never became rich or powerful, but he earned something maybe more valuable, the trust and love of ordinary people. To this day, he's remembered as the man who would not sell out. In a world so hungry for honest leaders, Kaggia's legacy shines bright, a bit like that whetstone he named his paper after, sharpening our sense of right and wrong. If you found Bildad Kaggia's story as inspiring as I have, please subscribe to Wandia Chronicles for more deep and engaging histories. We cover the unsung heroes and untold tales that textbooks often gloss over. Thank you so much for watching until the end. We appreciate you spending time with us to learn about our history. Before you go, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? We have viewers from all over, and it's always amazing to see how far our community reaches. So drop your location and say hi. Whether you're in Nairobi, New York, Nakuru, or anywhere in between, we'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves history or needs a little inspiration from Kaggia's example. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified of our next story. This has been Wandia Chronicles. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. The factual content of this episode is based on historical records and biographies of Bildad Kaggia, including Kaggia's own autobiography, Roots of Freedom, scholarly articles, and obituaries. Key reference sources include The Guardian, obituary by Shola Adenekan, Wikipedia, and the Bildad Kaggia Foundation archives, among others. These sources document Kaggia's role as a member of the Mau Mau Central Committee, his leadership in the trade union movement, his establishment of the independent Kaggia Church, and his principled stand against corruption in independent Kenya.